Hello, this is a continuation of Meenakshi Mukherjee's essay, The Anxiety of Indianness. In this video, we'll discuss the parts 4, 5 and 6 of the essay. Please make sure that you have read the previous parts and have listened to the videos before you come to this part. So, in the last class, we saw how Meenakshi Mukherjee is giving us examples of how a homogeneous idea of India was created by many of the writers that existed in that period. She gave us the example of the three pioneering writers and how R.K. Narayan and Malgudi was creating a homogeneous India which is very, very far removed from the reality of India as it is. In part 4, she begins by saying that it is generally agreed that the sudden profusion, liveliness and visibility of new Indian fiction in English in the 1980s can be traced back to the success of one of the seminal novels, Midnight's Children by Salman Rushdie. Now, remember in the earlier paragraph we have talked about how in the 1980s there was a boom of production of literary works, right? So, Salman Rushdie's Midnight's Children was a part of this 1980s boom of production. Now, this is a novel that we have as a part of our syllabus and we will be discussing it at length. And I wish we had finished it before coming to this part of the essay because there are many things being discussed. But I'm just going to rush through it now because when we do the novel later, we'll come back to these ideas again. Okay, so Midnight's Children is a book that was published in 1981 by Salman Rushdie. All right, and it is a book that has many elements of magical realism. The storyline begins by saying that in the midnight of 1947, when India was born, right, at that precise moment, there were about 1,001 children that were born. All right, and the closer they were to the midnight, the more magical powers that they had. So these Midnight's Children are actually an extended metaphor of the birth of India as a country. But we know that as a part of independence, there was partition happening a few years after that. There was there were wars, there was then emergency period that came up. All of these historical events are coming into the novel, and how these historical events are shaping the lives of these Midnight's Children. It comes to the point where almost more than half of them are already dead because of whatever happens in the country. Okay, so Midnight's Children, why it's important to us in this perspective. Okay, it even though it is a country, it is an English fiction written in India. Unlike the fiction written before it, it does not bring about that idea of homogeneity, because the best example is the fact that the Midnight's Children are a group of children from all parts of India. Okay, they are not presenting a homogeneous Hindu upper caste tradition that is usually seen in all of the other novels. Okay, here you see a plurality of traditions happening. Okay, instead of the great tradition, there is a plurality that is being shown. The true plurality of India is being showcased. Rushdie is celebrating the plenitude of India. All right, and in the postmodernist mode, we can say that this novel is one of the, even today we are going to study it. So it's challenged. In the postmodernist mode, we can say that it challenges two major issues. The first major issue is that there was a prevailing idea that many of the novels that are produced, it should change the literary map of the world. All right, and how can they change the literary map of the world? Only by engaging with issues in Western culture. That means if you are writing a novel, you should write about issues which influence the Western culture. It should not be very Indian issues. But here we see that the issues that are dealt with in the novel are very, very Indian. They have nothing to do with the Western tradition. So it was one of the things that was broken by Rushdie was this, that it did not deal with any Western issues. The second thing, or the second challenge, was that English, is primarily, we already talked about how it's primarily the language of Britain and America, and that is why who are the people who have the power to alter or to change the language, it is people sitting in England and America. We have no power of the language, we can just borrow it and use it. That was the idea. But Rushdie changed that also. In Midnight's Children, he used the use of language, even though he is using English, it is altered and changed in such a way which becomes very, very Indian. So those are the two things that Rushdie challenged when he wrote Midnight's Children. So what has happened is that Midnight's Children has resulted in a reversal of the center periphery paradigm. There is a center paradigm, right? When we study structuralism, we talk about everything as a structure, and in the midst of all that structure is a center. But when we come to post-structuralism, that center is destroyed, there is deconstruction happening. Okay. Similarly, here the center paradigm, the paradigm which shows that there is a center or there is an England and America which defines the rules of language. Okay, that paradigm was broken by Rushdie's Midnight's Children. He also talks, Meenakshi Mukherjee also talks about how F.R. Lewis talked about the great tradition or the canonical works which have to be followed. In order for good writing to happen, you should follow Plato and you should follow Aristophanes and Sophocles and all that. Okay, but even that great tradition was dissolved by Rushdie, because here he is bringing in a plurality of traditions. He's not following one genre, he's bringing about a plurality of traditions in this particular work, and this plurality is coming from the many different races, regions, and many different cultures that are coming into play in this one particular work. Even if we don't take a global view of this work, like if we don't look at how this novel was accepted in the global sense of the term, if we look at the only Indian reception, okay, the kind of reception that it got in India, it shows that Indian readers could see a representation of their own recent history. They could see things that they went through. I told you about how that it has the historical context of the partition, the independence, and the emergency period, right? So the Indian could see a representation of their own recent history. They could see the familiar circumstances that they themselves went through, and there are multiple ways of reading this one work. It is not only about the historical context, it's not only about the Midnight's Children. There are so many different layers of meaning that can be read into through this work. It could be read as a narrative, okay, where the abundant multiplicity of India is threatened by the forces of binary opposition. We see when we read the novel, we'll come to that, about how the Midnight's Children were rounded up and they were trying to be killed off, so that they represent the multiplicity of India. And when they were killed off, it shows that how they wanted only binary oppositions. They did not want these magical children because they are a threat to the idea of India. Right? So the multiplicity, doing away with multiplicity, is something that comes up in the novel. On the other hand, we can read this novel where there is an obsessive fear of fragmentation, of breaking up. We see that when India was born, it was born into two countries, right? India and Pakistan came into being, then Bangladesh came into being. There were different states being carved out. So there is a process of fragmentation that is opening up, and this idea of fissures or gaps or holes is a very, very important motif in the novel. We see that when the novel begins, okay, it begins with it is three generations of the Sinai family that we see, and the grandfather Sinai, okay, I'm forgetting his name. We see he's a doctor, and he was permitted to look at his female patient. There was a bed sheet that was put in front of the female patient, and only one small hole is there, and wherever that female patient is having pains or only that part was shown. So this India as such, the entire female patient could not be seen, the entire body of the patient could not be seen by the doctor. Only one part after the other could be seen, and only the part that was suffering. Okay, no other part would be shown. So that idea of this hole, of that perforated sheet, is a motive that comes up again and again in the novel. So this image of mutilation, of holes, okay, of the country splitting up like amoeba, it's a very, very important part of this novel.